Good afternoon, friends, Lilligans, anti-novelists, anti-netters, curious onlookers. Everyone is welcome. The princess is happy to have you here in the library. She's so very happy since I cleaned off all of those pesky note cards yesterday. She has her napping table back. She's very helpful, keeps me on task. I'm sure you can tell. But let's get right to it. As promised, today we're going to look at the plot box. Now, the plot box is a tool that generally lives over in my Zettelkasten. But for our purposes, I have pulled that section of cards out and I've just parked them in a note box lid, which is one of my favorite things to have on hand, so that if I need to work with a section of cards that I want to keep intact, I just park them there. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to start with Act 1. So, I want to begin on my plot cheat sheet. This little cheat sheet has the 8 major plot points of a typical 3 or 4 act story. Now, a disclaimer. Yes, I understand that the 3 or 4 act story structure is a very Western convention. I also know that in many cases it has been hijacked by Hollywood and the movie industry so that it becomes a very rigid formulaic structure. I am firmly against that. However, we have to start somewhere with a common language with which we can discuss storytelling. So I begin with the 8-point structure. Number 1, because most of us are intuitively familiar with it. We've been living with it our whole lives probably. And number 2, it's a nice, concise way to break a story down. With that said, I'm going to dive way deeper into everything from the 2-act story structure to the 12-act story structure. We're going to look at East meets West. We're going to look at cultures from all around the world, and we're going to dig really deep into writing great stories and all the different ways that you can do that. So we'll start here, but definitely look forward to all of the possibilities, because we're going to explore some great story building techniques from around the world. So let's get started with the one that we know the best. The 8-point plot structure. On my plot cheat sheet, I have Act 1, which includes the inciting incident and the first plot point. That's what we're going to cover today. This will take 4 videos to do, or else each video will be over an hour long, and I don't want to subject you to that. Act 2 generally includes the first battle and the midpoint. That's exactly halfway through the story. Act 3 is where your character becomes active. They fight their second battle, and that brings you to the 3rd plot point of the story, which puts you on the downhill spiral towards the climax. Act 4 is where your hero fights their final battle, and they are reborn into their new world. If you're thinking this sounds crazy like the hero's journey, you would be absolutely right, because that is another iteration of the plot structure that we're discussing. So yes, you're exactly right. The way that I like to break this up when I teach writing classes, I like to teach it in a couple of segments. Segment 1 is what I like to call the offering. The offering is essentially Act 1. It's when you're making an offer of a journey to your reader. You're offering them an adventure, something fun, something interesting. You're just giving them that little peek into this new world, which is what makes them want to step into the world and stay there to finish your book. The middle part, which is Acts 2 and 3, is what I call is made up of milestones and discoveries. Those are the little things that your character has to surpass, fight through, figure out. They're meeting their milestones and they're making discoveries. That's the meat of the story. That's where all the things are happening. That's the journey. That's what you want to share with your reader. And then finally, the settlement. The settlement is where you wrap everything up in a bow. Again, that is a very Western convention. So there are many different ways to end a story, but in this case, we're going to end with a nice settlement that gives your reader that satisfying ending. Now, it doesn't mean that it may not segue into a book 2 or another chapter of a series, but suffice it to say that your reader wants the satisfaction of a firm landing and knowing that things are wrapped up. With that said, let's take a look at the plot box. So what we're looking at is just my little box that I've pulled out of the Zettelkasten so that we can look over that Act 1 structure and possibility. I've added at the end of Act 1, before we get into Act 2, I've just added a little marker. This is another thing that I like to recycle. Greeting cards, postcards, and things that people send me, I use them as markers, or sometimes I repurpose them as note cards in my box if the back is blank. Nothing goes to waste in the library. Here we are in Act 1. In Act 1, we're going to meet our hero. You see that this is numbered 7001. There are 24 cards in my plot box. So they go through 7024, which is the ending. So numbers 1 through 24 are how I slot ideas into different parts of my story. So maybe I have a note card and I'm thinking, this piece of action, whatever this piece of action is, or this character card, I might want my character to experience this thing or this scene. I'm thinking it might go somewhere around just after the first plot point. So I can take that card and I can drop it right there. It's just a placeholder in my box using the 24 points or beats of the plot as a way to sort and organize my story ideas, my scenes and sequels. So that's the high level view of how the plot box works. It just gives me a place to take my story cards and say, okay, if she's going to have this car accident and that's going to happen back here, then I need to make sure up here that I establish the fact that there is something wrong with the brakes in the car or whatever. Okay, so it's just allowing me a visual way to sequence the things I'm thinking about in the story. It's also allowing me, because of the nature of the way the cards are nested together, to always be seeing my little prompt and suggestion cards, which we're going to talk about those. So it's a multi-use system. Number one, it allows me to sequence things that I'm thinking about or working on in the place in the story where I think they might go. And number two, it is allowing me, by looking past these little prompt writing cards, to always be thinking about different things that might be happening during that act. So 7001 is labeled the really bad day. So perhaps you want to show your character having a really bad day. Let's say your main character is a lawyer and she gets fired from her job. That's a really bad day. So that kicks off your story with a bang, right? Something bad happens right off the bat. Then I have a card that's called the disturbance. 7002 is labeled something peculiar. So maybe as she gets fired from her job, she storms out of the building and bumps headlong into a mysterious man. Dun, dun, dun. Something peculiar happens. Okay, so you can see how I'm starting to stack up those little story points using the plot beat cards so that I can sequence things out for myself. What if, however, instead of something peculiar or disturbing, what if she finds herself grasping at straws? Maybe instead of storming out of the building and bumping into our stranger who's peculiar, she sits at her desk knowing she has to clean her desk out, and she starts going through old case files and she starts trying to come up with a way to get her job back. She's grasping at straws. Okay, see how that works? You're just using the prompts in order to get you to think about what could be happening in my story. Now, let's look at some of these detailed prompt cards. These are just things that could be a part of Act 1 of your story. Now, technically, they could be a part of any part of your story, but I've just peppered them throughout my plot box so that as I'm leafing in those character and scene cards, as I'm thinking about where they might go in the story, I'm also running across these little gems because they're suggesting to me things that could be happening. And sometimes if I have a couple of points that I think, ooh, those two things could be great in Act 2, I'm going to take this little suggestion card and I'm going to stick it back there in Act 2 so that when I'm writing and I run into that section, I'm reminded that I wanted to include that. What do these have on them? They say the known or limited awareness, showing the character in their normal world. Something in the story creates a want or a desire. How does your character try to fill that desire? There's tension, there's frustration or disappointment. A moral or ethical dilemma. Think about this. What if your character does the right thing for the wrong reason, or the wrong thing for the right reason? That is interesting story stuff right there. Maybe you show them demonstrating empathy or being motivated to care for someone. That's a really good way to establish rooting interest. Rooting interest is something that Brandon Sanderson talks about in his course that is online that he teaches at BYU. He's so amazingly generous. He records his how to write a novel classes and posts them so that anybody can watch them. I highly recommend it. He has a very different approach to story writing that is extremely structured and thorough, but it doesn't rely at all on the kind of system that I'm teaching, which is using the plot beats. So, highly recommend Brandon Sanderson. What about situations that reveal the theme or questions that reveal things? Over here, we've got trouble brewing, mysterious events, something revealing or embarrassing, meeting a mentor, making your reader a promise to fulfill as the author. That's a Brandon Sanderson concept where he talks about promising your reader something and then paying off that promise at the end of the book. So those are some of the prompt cards. 7004 is what if there's a call to adventure? What if your character gets called off on a mad adventure? Could be something exciting there. Behind that one, I have another prompt card. Discovering an inner or an outer goal. Refusing the quest or the goal. What if your character says, nope, I'm not doing it. I want nothing to do with that. And they bury their head in the sand. Okay, that's a problem. That's a little story challenge. They have a debate or they are reluctant. You're shoving the protagonist out of their comfort zone. We're going to take that mousy librarian from the Midwest and we are going to stick her in a canoe in the boundary waters of Canada. That's a story I'd want to read. Besides, librarians are so tough, I wouldn't want to mess with her. What about a new situation or a new reality being seen or revealed? Another Brandon Sandersonism are the three things. A character's main flaw must be fixed or the character will fail. They must have a handicap that must be overcome, and they should have a limitation that they can work within. Those are nice ways of developing characters. I'm telling you, go check out Brandon Sanderson. They accept the quest and thus the point of no return. Once your character accepts the quest, there's no turning back. That's when they're in it to win it, they're in the story, and hopefully that seals the deal for your reader wanting to continue on through the story with them to see what happens. 7005 is sticking their head in the sand, so that's the little prompt that says they decide, nope, I want no part of that. Then there's pulling out the rug. After they've stuck their head in the sand and said they want nope, no part of that, something happens that forces them to have to face the quest and accept the adventure. And that brings us to the 25% mark. Generally, about 25% into the book, you're going to reach the first plot point, which is the first major change in the character's life where they have to accept the challenge. That's the main turning point. With that said, I'm going to take you over here to one other place, and I'm going to show you the corresponding folders. Now, I know those of you that are pantsers are probably breaking out in hives at all of this organization. This is my process, and it's how it works for me. How it works for you is up to you to decide. I'm just giving you the tools. So corresponding to my plot box, remember there's 24. There's the card 7001 that goes through the card 7024. For each one of these, I have a corresponding folder. Remember Really Bad Day 7001? Well, here's folder number 1, Really Bad Day. Remember number 2, Something Peculiar? That was 7002, but I know what it means. Over here's a folder for Something Peculiar. There's my Grasping at Straws. That's separated by Act 1A, which is my inciting incident. That's my first major plot point. So it gets a big green folder that sticks up above the others because these potential scenes and events are leading up to this major plot point. See how that works? Then I've got 3 more. I've got number 4, my call to adventure, number 5, which would be 7005 in the plot box, head in the sand, and number 6, pulling out the rug. And that brings us to my next major plot point, which is the first plot point. Then I'm not going to go beyond that because we will cover that in the next video. But the purpose of these folders is these are collectors of document type information, or it helps me remember things that I might want to include. So for example, under Really Bad Day for my novel, I have, well, let's just look and see what's in here. I have some notes. I have a note that says missing mom, finding a method to retrieve her from unspooling. Ooh, there's something new. That's a little bit of a spoiler, but I won't go any further. I've got super control and soothing, needs to learn to let go. I've got a note that says worried about something, opening anxiety and preoccupied. So these are just notes to myself that have not made it into the plot box. I'm just dropping those things into my catch-all folder for things that could contribute to the really bad day. Then I've got, this is labeled Decoding 2014-2015. This is actually a preparation document for an art exhibit that took place back in 2014. And what I did is I used this event in my novel because my main character, Tara, is a museum researcher, and she decides to rerun this event from 2014 in the present time of the novel, which is 2019. So I needed to have all the information about that event at hand so that I could write it authentically when it came time to put it in the book. Well, I'm not going to print all of that information onto note cards to go into my Zettelkasten box, because it's just going to go from the document from the museum into writing my story. There's no note card stop in between there. So that's the purpose of the folders. The folders capture things like documents, different items of interest. This is actually a draft that's under something peculiar. I just drafted out what I thought that could be, and I dropped it right in folder number 2. So then when I was ready to go back and write the book, which now all of these chapters are finished, I've just left in here the things that I used to create them. So if I want to go back and check it, I know it's going to be in that section. So we can get further into that as we go further down the process, but that's how the system works. The plot box is where the cards and the prompts live, and it's a shorthand for sequencing things in the story and prompting me on to the next scenes and sequels. And then the folder companion is just a place where I can drop drafts I'm working on, drop notes to myself about things that I don't want to forget, and drop documents that have bearing on those scenes or chapters that I'm working on. So there you go. That is the overview to the plot box and the accompanying folder box. Tomorrow we will pick up at the beginning of Act 2, and I will continue talking you through how the plot box functions as a tool and extension of your Zettelkasten. With that, I thank you for your time. Sweet Kitty is still sound asleep. I will see you tomorrow when we pick up with Act 2.